Thanks for tuning in to The World We Want, the NAAEE podcast, a project of the North American Association for Environmental Education. If these episodes resonate with you, after the podcast, check out our website, which contains opportunities for professional development, resources for educators and administrators, and guidance on how you can incorporate environmental education into a broader teaching strategy. Visit us at NAAEE.org/podcast. And thanks for listening.
Welcome to The World We Want, the NAAEE podcast. Hi, I'm your host, Gerry Ellis. And with over 3 decades of global conservation filming experience, I've seen firsthand and documented the impact of environmental education and the many lives that environmental educators have changed.
I have an acronym for TEACH. It's True Education Always Creates Hope. We have an opportunity to create the world we want. I do think that when I walk into a room as a black man and there are black kids in the room and I say I'm a scientist, their eyes kind of widen because they do have kind of a traditional notion of what they think a scientist is. So I do find that valuable to be able to say, no, you can be a scientist. Anyone can be a scientist as long as they're curious and as long as they have the passion for learning about the world around them to engineer that hope.
On The World We Want, we explore the roots and the impact of their work through the voices of changemakers on the front line of education. People like you, creating a more caring, vibrant, and sustainable world. On this episode of The World We Want, we talk with Stefan Moss, an environmental scientist and middle school teacher, whose curiosity and pull to the outside world have shaped his career path. Stefan has dedicated his work to youth mentorship and environmental education and stewardship, aiming to create opportunities for young learners, inspiring them to reach for what fulfills their passion. And now I am delighted to welcome to The World We Want, Stefan Moss. Stefan.
Hey, man.
Welcome to The World We Want.
Good to be here.
And looking at everything you've done, I was like, where the heck do we start? I looked at everything you do and I went, my God, the guy's a heptapod. He's got like tentacles going in every direction under the sun.
Yeah, I'm a bit of an ADHD educator.
But it looks like you bring it all together.
Yeah, try to.
That's kind of where I wanted to start. I mean, first, let's start with you're an environmental scientist.
Yeah.
And an environmental educator.
Yeah.
So where do we bridge those two things?
That's a good question. I think passion is where I always find myself. Whenever I'm thinking about the things that I do, I always think about what am I passionate about, and education kind of became a passion as I started my career as a scientist. When I went to grad school, I was doing all the science work and I had a mentor. His name was Thomas Wilson. And a part of my grad work was how do you take all the science stuff that you got? We were working with the Tennessee Aquarium, doing some turtle work and on the river every day. And we were getting all this amazing data, baseline data for these various chemicals that were legacy chemicals in the river. And the challenge was, well, how do you take all this stuff and translate it and go into the school system, go into middle school classroom, go into high school classroom and talk about what it is that you did. And so that was something that as I started getting into that, I realized, hey, this is cool. Like taking the stuff that seems hard and actually making it fun and making it exciting. We made a game. We did all sorts of amazing things with the data. But it was something that I developed a passion for. So I kept wanting to kind of find my way back to taking science and making it available and accessible and relevant to people who, might not have been able to jump into it from the science end, but totally got all the other things that, we were doing. So passion, man, science and education seem to me to be two things that I'm passionate about. And I just want to keep doing it.
When you first started getting into the schools, I'm curious because you're from the Bahamas.
Yeah.
And you're now in Georgia.
I am, yeah. ATL.
When I think most people think about those two places, access to science is not something that comes the first thing to mind. Is that the case? And if so, how do you make science tangible?
That's a good question. I think it wouldn't be right to say science is not there. I think I think maybe traditional notions of science. If you're thinking or coming at science from a particular perspective, you might say that. But I grew up swimming in the beach, swimming on the beach, looking at fish, snorkeling the coral reefs, looking at the beautiful corals, and just enjoying nature and being outside and observing patterns. And I've been doing that ever since I was a kid. So it's all I knew growing up. So I think that from that standpoint, the curiosity, the passion for wanting to understand how nature works, that's kind of where you begin anyone's scientific journey. Starts off with kind of observing and trying to make an observation, asking questions about what it is that you're seeing. Not in like a prescribed scientific method per se, but just that desire to inquire and to learn and to be curious about the world around you. So I would say, from the Bahamas standpoint, no, and there's science everywhere. There are people all over the place that are, engaging and trying to learn about, when the fish are going to be over here, or, when the conch spawning, or when the lobsters. It's all around you all the time. It might not be formalized. It might not be, there might not be people publishing in scientific journals, like that per se. Although there are people that do that now. When I was growing up, I wasn't aware of that kind of work back then. But even then, people were publishing things and getting things out there. But no, I mean, even the average person on the street, if you ask them questions about birds or fish, they have some knowledge about the world around them because they're observing and seeing it. And in Atlanta, man, as kind of my adopted home. I think the same is true. I think people are out there in the forest. They're out there doing nature and doing science and learning about the world in their own unique way. And it might not be a way that, like I said, from a traditional or a particular vantage point, you might call it science. But certainly curiosity, that's kind of a global thing. Humans are naturally curious. Humans naturally want to learn about the world around them. Wherever you are, you're going to find someone that's trying to figure out what's going on.
As a scientist, do you look back, you say, okay, I had this curiosity as a kid. I had my aha moments, snorkeling. Do you see that as like, okay, that's what I have to do with science? I have to touch on their aha moment?
Yeah, I do feel some of that. I do work with young people a lot, and I do love to see those aha moments. And I love to help stoke that passion and fire that they have. I think a lot of kids, need to see someone passionate about the work that they do. That kind of helps them to be okay with their own passion. I think sometimes if you have a passion for something, let's say insects, right, and no one around you is passionate about it, you will kind of keep it to yourself. But if there's someone that you see as like, yeah, let's go, entomology, or whatever it is you're interested in, seeing someone passionate about those things kind of gets them excited. And so I love to be passionate and to share what I do in hopes that students kind of feel very comfortable exploring what it is that they're interested in science or otherwise for that matter. So I do feel that sense of obligation to try to stoke that fire and get kids passionate about nature, the outdoors, science.
When you walk into a new room with a bunch of kids, are you the scientist that they expect to see?
That's a good question. I don't know, man. I used to be more concerned about that earlier in my career. I'm not as concerned about that now. I just want to be my authentic self wherever I go. And if people see me as a scientist, that's fine. If they don't see me as a scientist, that's fine too. But I guess from my vantage point now, I'm more interested in just how can I give back and do the things that I feel passionate about and making sure that I inspire the next generation. If people connect with that, great. And if not, that's okay as well.
The reason I asked is because I was at a conference many, many years ago, and there was an environmental architect that was asked to speak. And intentionally, they didn't put his picture in the brochure. It just had who he was, his name, and people. And it was, I would say, 85% of the people there were white. And so the introduction was made, and he got up in there, and he had rastas down to the middle of his back. He spoke with this amazing Oxford British accent. And he was just, every stereotype in the world was blown off of the map, and everybody paid attention in a different way to that. And he resonated, and he talked about, the urban landscape and how creating a more livable, culturally inviting urban landscape. Like he broke those barriers down in a unique way that people paid attention. And I just wondered, you bringing science into kids who may not have had that kind of introduction to it. Science is like the thing that's down the hall and I don't go to that class?
No, I think representation is important. I do think that when I walk into a room as a black man and there are black kids in the room and I say I'm a scientist, their eyes kind of widen because they do have kind of a traditional notion of what they think a scientist is. So I do find that valuable to be able to say, no, you can be a scientist. Anyone can be a scientist as long as they're curious and as long as they have the passion for learning about the world around them. I do think representation is extremely important. I'm at the point in my career now where I don't necessarily lead with that. I am who I am. I can't change who I am. And I think that as time goes on, I hope that, more people will embrace just being okay with people who they are and admiring and respecting what they bring to the table. But I know for young kids especially, it is important for them to see someone that looks like them occupying these roles. That's very important.
Right. Yeah. And even if they're not black, I mean, if they're anything but white, they see somebody else occupying those roles. We have the same thing with the nonprofit that we have in our projects overseas. And one of the things that we're trying to do is bring in some young camera people from Africa into other African countries so they can see that they don't all come from Europe.
Sure.
They all come from the BBC as cameramen.
Yeah.
You can see people's eyes open up in a different way. And now this becomes attainable, this thing that they're going to do. And I'm really curious about science in that way, in environmental learning in general.
It's important to tell a more complete story. I think a lot of stories have been very kind of narrow. And I think having everybody at the table being able to bring what they bring, it makes the story more expansive. It's everybody can do science. Everybody can participate in this important work that's being done. And there's no limitation per se out there. The only limitations are the ones that you set for yourself.
I saw a lot of pictures on your website of you outdoors.
I'm very passionate about that. Yeah.
Tell me about that, getting kids outdoors for the first time in a truly wild place that are urban dwellers.
Yeah. Well, I think that exposure is one of the things that young people need as they, engage with life and trying to figure out who they are. I think the more exposure they have to various different types of careers, different types of people, different spaces, they kind of become more aware of who they are and what they want to do. And I think for me, taking kids outside, I'm looking at, hey, this is a possible career path for you. You might not think about being outdoors or being a biologist or a wildlife person or anything like that. You might not think about yourself in that kind of way, but not everyone's built to be in an office space or to be up or behind a computer or anything like that. And so if you get out here and if you like this and if you really enjoy kind of going on this hike and if you like even the adventure of it all and the potential for rain or whatever, if that's something that moves you and you feel comfortable and excited, this could be a career path for you. And I want kids to be able to explore those opportunities, low stakes, and have someone that is supportive of them and wants to celebrate what it is that they're doing. I think that's really important, especially for young kids. I work with a lot of middle schoolers. And so, they're just trying to figure out who they are and figure out life. But if they have those positive experiences in nature, man, that's another opportunity and another possible option for them as they explore careers and things like that. I think that's key. If I knew that, have a job in the outdoors, my path might have been a little bit different. I am doing what I enjoy doing now, but I didn't really know that, oh yeah, you could actually have that as a career. I didn't know that when I was, 12 or 13. I thought about myself from a scientist standpoint as traditionally being in some type of lab or something like that. But once I got a career, once I got my master's in environmental science, I realized, oh, this is great. I could actually travel and explore the world and see things, and I get paid for that, paid nicely for that. So, it opened up my eyes, and I hope I could open up the eyes of some other folks as well.
Have you seen that aha moment in some of these kids?
I have, man. It's a beautiful thing to see, man. I've seen kids literally stand, on top of a little rock by a creek and literally lift their hands as if they're praising something. It's kind of like they can take a breath, and not have a proverbial boss or anything. They just feel like this is a space. I occupy the space. It's mine. I'm in my element. I've seen that happen on multiple occasions. And for some people, man, that's where they need to be. Some people need to know that that's a space you can occupy and be free and do the things that you enjoy doing and have that experience. That's something that you can repeat and have as a part of your career. I think that's important for kids to have that.
Yeah. Have you heard them verbalize what you said about your own career? Had you been younger and said, "Oh, well, this is a career path. I can do this," and not just in a lab in a things of science. Have you heard them verbalize?
The middle school is not as much, but I have worked with some college kids. I work with a group called the Rocky Mountain Sustainability and Science Network. We meet in Colorado, and we take kids to Teton and Yellowstone. I say kids; these are college students, but. No, I do have times where, they're walking around, they go, yeah, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And they have a fire and that passion, and I see it in them, and I'm like, yes, go for it, go for it. There are no limitations for you.
How do you continue to stoke that in them once they're out of that environment?
I think giving them the tools to provide those experiences for themselves. So you can say, hey, look, here's a park, but there are others. Go explore them. Here is a resource, but there are others. I'm one person, but there are many others. Reach out to this person. Here's an email. Here's a phone contact. Here's a program. Here's an internship. I think information sharing in that kind of sense of I'm a resource for you. I think that's key because a lot of students and kids are looking for opportunities, but they don't know often where to find them. And so just being a sounding board, being a resource. Sometimes I get messages on LinkedIn, Instagram. Hey, I want to do this. Do you know anybody there? And I'm just someone that can provide a path. Go explore, go find it. I think everyone should have that kind of pay it forward mindset in the field. Hey, look, you've done some stuff. Make sure the folks that are coming up, the younger kids, have that opportunity as well.
When did that first happen for you, that sense of pay it forward?
Let's see. I've had many pay it forward moments. I can't really think of one particularly, but I was a Boy Scout in the Bahamas, and I had experiences where, I got outside and experienced things for the first time, and family members and people were around me, and they supported me in that, and it was kind of my first foray into nature, and those were positive experiences that I had. So, having those positive experiences matter because then you can build on them, And I think being able to curate those positive experiences for a student or a kid at a young age gives them that sense of, okay, I can do this. I can get out here. I can be in nature. I'm not afraid of what's behind the tree or the dark or anything like that. These kind of things that are kind of these myths in the background. No, you can be out here. It's fun. It's fine. The campfire is great. Nothing's behind you, and having those experiences and them leaving the campsite with a smile on their face, you can build on that. Students can build on that and do more.
Do we have enough of those opportunities, do you think?
I don't feel like it. I think some of it is being eaten up by, modern things, technology, phones, that kind of thing. And of course, there's a big movement for people to get back to that, get back to being outside and just enjoying nature.
I guess it's a two-part question in a way, because do we have enough of those opportunities? And have we created enough gateways and awareness for people to see that there are those opportunities?
We're working, man. We have a lot of other amazing and cool things out there that get in the way. But I don't think that it's something that we can solve like tomorrow. I think that there needs to be a shift in the way we do technology and in the way we kind of put technology over those authentic outdoor experiences. I feel like in many ways, as technology continues to advance and improve, we have to be more intentional about making sure students and kids get outside. And that takes a lot of effort and work because, these phones they're a force to be reckoned with.
They are, but they are also incredibly powerful tools. We, in some of the places in Africa that we're working in, Sierra Leone and Cameroon and stuff, in teaching people on the ground how to use these devices right in their hand, that they can do GPS work. They can do transects in the forest. It's citizen science, village style. And a lot of young people, don't have formal educations, but they're masters of this little device.
Absolutely.
Because they're out there using it every day, and they're literally, I was filming them photographing footprints and then making scans of the footprint and then uploading it and doing population studies of local wildlife. And
see, that's the intentional work where you're saying, hey, here's a tool, but we're going to use it in a particular kind of way. If we're intentional like that, and if we're using the devices and it being used as a tool and not kind of the lead, then I think we can continue to have the success that we want with getting students outside.
When students see that, do you see any kind of light go off or light bulb go off that they never thought about technology, the things that they have in their hands every day and they use every day actually could be a part of their learning experience?
I do see where you can have even more incredible experiences when you kind of tag a device along with it. I know we do bio blitzes and we get the kids to use iNaturalist and Seek and that kind of thing, and they go crazy knowing that they can grab their phone and figure out what something is by just pointing the camera at it. So, but then you have to be intentional with that. That has to be something that a teacher gets trained on, learning how to use the tool and figuring out ways to incorporate it into the curriculum and that kind of thing. So again, there just needs to be that intentionality, like, hey, we're going to use our devices, but here's how we're going to use it. Here are the goals that we have in place. I think if we can move forward in that kind of way, I think we'll be okay.
Where does that lie in building this bridge to the students, that the teachers need to embrace that approach, being intentional with these devices? I mean, I've encountered teachers who don't want them in the classroom at all.
It's tough, man. It's tough. Yeah, it's not easy, man. I think there are real challenges that are before us. I think, like we talked about earlier with passion, educators that are in the classroom or doing things formally or informally, the passion must be there to see students get into nature and to really have authentic and incredible experiences. So whatever it takes to make that happen is what, as an instructor, you have to be willing to do. And it involves taking risks. Sometimes it won't work out the way you want. You're taking kids outside, man, anything can happen. The rain will come down, wind will stop blowing, whatever. You have to be willing to take those risks. And you have to be passionate about wanting to see that happen. If you don't have really the desire or the passion to engage students on that level, then it's going to be more of a mediocre experience. So, I always, whenever I have a chance to talk to a young teacher, I always ask, do you really want to do it, man? Is this something you're really passionate about? Because if you're not passionate about it, eventually the students are going to know. Then they're very intuitive and they really know when a teacher is really vested in their learning and really vested in that experience. And so it is something that we have to continue to work, towards making sure that the teachers that we put before students have that fire and want to engage and curate and create those experiences.
Have you ever taken teachers out
I have
to do this?
Yeah. And of course, we have a program. It's the Forest for Every Classroom program. That's a partnership. It's the Georgia Children's Forest Network. And we take teachers outside and we provide them with opportunities to think about how they can incorporate kind of forests and kind of forest education into their curriculum.
Across the curriculum.
Yeah. And they have to create like a lesson plan or something. We kind of guide them through thinking about ways to incorporate the national forests and, kind of forestry into their into their curriculum. So teachers that come out there, they're there. So they showed up. So they have the passion, they're interested. But that's not every teacher, So how do you get those other teachers who aren't showing up to be interested and to want to try to experiment with new things and take some risks? And that's challenging because of obviously teachers have a lot of going on. There's not a whole lot of resources always available. Time is very, restrictive sometimes in terms of what you're able to do. So you have to really want to do it.
You seem to be all over Georgia and everything that's going on and a ton of different programs. Two questions. One is, where do you find all the time as a human being? And the second one is, do you see bridges and links to the other things you're doing and try to tie it all together so it becomes an ecosystem of activities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to make time for the things you're passionate about. It's something that you have to have that internal engine driving you. And I've always said that, I'm going to follow my heart and I'm going to do the things that I'm most passionate about. And so there is some, you have to be selective. You can't do everything. I have a mantra. You can do anything, but you can't do everything, right? But I do try to engage in work that feels meaningful to me, that I know that I do a lot of work with young people, for example. So we take youth outside. We do, in the summer, there's lots of programming going on. So whereas I could be, on a beach somewhere chilling, which I do get to do, I do take some of my summers and I take students outside, man, because I feel passionate about that. I think that those experiences are important. And so, yes, the kind of the umbrella of it all is engaging young people, paying it forward, being able to be a model that they can look at and hopefully follow in some kind of way, and just following my passions and the things that I'm excited about and making sure that I'm doing something meaningful. And I wasn't always in that space. When I first got to Atlanta, I was, doing environmental consulting and that kind of thing. And I wasn't feeling fulfilled in my work. The consulting work was, it just wasn't, I didn't feel as if it was something that I can do in the long term. It wasn't a sustainable thing for me. And so when I got into education and teaching and kind of moving away from that more kind of corporate type situation, I just really found this is sustainable for me. If I'm 80, I still want to be, with a cane trying to get up the side of the mountain, And I think that that's where you have to be in terms of what you do. Like, are you going to find something that you see yourself doing in perpetuity for as long as you can put your 2 feet on the ground in the morning? Then that's what you should be working towards. And anything that enables you to continue to do that work, you should try to pursue it on some level, So yeah, everything that I do, we're building bridges in youth engagement, building bridges in faith communities, building bridges with nonprofits and government agencies, and just trying to build a stewardship ethic that allows for us to continue to enjoy, the clean air, clean water, all the things that we want to have, and making sure people can make good decisions as citizens in that respect.
How important do you think it is in linking what you're doing around environmental education and nature to faith communities?
I think that's critical, man. In fact, my doctoral advisor, Dr. Natalie King, she is a really big champion of this, and I'm so glad that I've been able to align with some of the things that she's been doing. But I've worked in faith communities for most of my life, and I see them as a very important but underutilized resources for stewardship work. I mean, there's an opportunity there for us to engage a large number of people that have some connection to nature from a creation standpoint. They do believe that, hey, there's something out there that created everything. So if there's something out there that created everything and you have been tasked to manage and steward that, then how well are you doing? And who are you learning from to make that stewardship more efficient and better? And so I do think that there's a big opportunity there to engage in youth groups and churches and say, here are resources for you if you're interested in being a good steward of nature and the environment and God's creation. How can you do that? Here are some resources. I think having those resources and being able to provide those resources for faith-based communities is something that everyone should be a part of on some level. If you're in that community, you should be engaging with that work in some kind of way.
Have you seen the idea of stewardship versus ownership in nature in faith-based communities? Have you seen an evolution of that, or do you see that when that idea is brought up, that it's like, I hadn't thought about that was my role?
Yeah, I think in some places it's not as teased out in a way, that inspires like explicit action. But it's there. It's kind of underlying. It's like, you do know that being a good steward is a part of what you're supposed to be doing as someone that, that believes in a creator. If it's been given to you and if you have access to it, there's an obligation for you to take care of it and preserve it for your children and your grandchildren. I think that's, whether or not it's explicit from the pulpit or whether or not, people hear it often, it's there. It's there. And we really need to do a better job of engaging communities on that level. I think there's some work being done, but we could always do more.
I want to pivot to something else you're doing. It's called the Saltwater Underground Railroad.
Yeah. What is that?
I have so many questions. When I saw that title, I thought, was it an underground railroad that got flooded by salt water? Is this a climate change thing? Is this like, where are we going with this? So tell me about it. Explain what it is. And
let me tell you how I got into it, because I wasn't necessarily looking for this thing. Some things choose you. So in 2018, I was working with an organization, Outdoor Afro, based in California. Founder RootMap has an extensive network of volunteers that do lead hikes and things like that. So I was the hike leader in the Southeast in Atlanta. And I was visiting these parks and just kind of traveling in the Southeast and visiting these parks. And I kept hearing these stories about the Underground Railroad going south. And I thought to myself, well, I know the Underground Railroad goes north to the Free States in Canada. What is this? What is this southern thing? And I went down to Florida and was doing something there. And I was, I was talking to one of the outdoor Afro leaders, and she mentioned the Bahamas is one of the destinations of the railroad. I was like, what? Tell me more. Because I grew up in the Bahamas and we never learned about this stuff in any of our, school curriculum. So I started doing some more research and just trying to get as much information as I can get. And there were all these national park documents that talked about these escapes from Florida to the Bahamas. And so I got to share this information. So I put together a website just in hopes to share some of the stuff that I started to get my hands on. And it just kind of blossomed and grew into this project where now we have, I use Google Earth as kind of the tour. It's a virtual tour that I built in Google Earth. And basically all it does is I have about 17 sites. These are key sites where there was either some type of an escape or some type of an event that happened that precipitated an escape. And, this movement from plantations in South Carolina and Georgia into Spanish Florida, a lot of people don't know that, Florida was Spanish territory. So it was basically a different country right there at the border of Georgia and South Carolina. So enslaved people were, escaping from plantations and finding their way into Spanish Florida. The Spanish had a kind of different perspective on slavery. Once you got to once you got to Florida, you can be free as long as you, converted to Catholicism and pretty much fought in the military. And so enslaved people were able to find freedom on some level in Florida. But with, changes that were taking place, there were, steps that the Americans were taking to try to gain Florida and make it an American territory. And so there were all these different movements happening. And by the early 1800s, what you have are floods of people trying to get to Florida. And when they couldn't go any further, they negotiated with Bahamian wreckers and boatsmen that were coming up to work on the reefs, and they negotiated and found passage to the Bahamas, which was a British colony at the time, and they were able to get freedom there because there was a sizable population of free blacks, and the islands really were conducive to hiding and kind of being able to escape. And so, but these stories were not told to us as kids. I grew up learning about European history, British history. We learned about the Arawaks, Lucayans, that kind of thing, but nothing really about how Black people were able to find their way to the Bahamas. And of course, there are multiple lines of things happening in the Bahamas. That's just one particular story, but it was a fascinating story for me, living in Georgia and learning about these stories from here and not ever hearing about it in my classrooms in the Bahamas. So the project has definitely, sprouted wings. There are people that are asking me about curriculum materials, and we're applying for grants and that kind of thing. It's very exciting, but it's just, in a way, when I jumped into the history, I thought to myself, what am I doing? I'm not a historian. This is silly, But I literally, there was about 3 months where I couldn't sleep. I was literally on the internet looking for documents, posting them, putting together the Google Earth virtual tour. And now that it's all done and I'm getting, work and talking to people and sharing ideas, now I see it is an environmental education tool because we're looking at GIS, we're looking at geography and how enslaved people are moving and migrating and finding resources and utilizing their knowledge of land and water to find freedom. But I didn't think about it from that standpoint. I was just so deep in trying to understand history. I lost sight of all the STEM and all the science applications. But now it's a bit more clear to me. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Are there any older people in the islands who have some hint of it?
Yeah, a lot of folks who, hey, yeah, my family will, I think my folks are from Florida, and there are names that are, similar in Florida and Bahamas, the Bowlegs, for example. There was one of the Seminole chiefs, Billy Bowleg. And so a lot of the enslaved people that aligned with the Seminoles during that time frame, they took the name of the Seminole chief. And so in some cases, there's some evidence of intermarriage, but these were Black folks that were just there aligning with the Seminoles because they had a shared interest in preserving, in the sense of the Seminoles, they want to preserve their land. And of course, Black people were trying to ensure their freedom. They didn't want to be re-enslaved. And so they were allies during this time frame. And Black people assimilated in some way into Seminole culture, and they were able to find freedom, in that way. So lots of ties between the Southeast Florida, the Gullah Geechee corridor, folks in South Carolina. There's lots of shared history there that I'm still exploring and still learning about. It's fascinating.
Are you starting to get people contributing to you and to going, hey, I know about they're seeing?
Yeah, I
it's
formed
starting
a small
to grow.
Yeah. I was able to form a small advisory board of people. There's a lady by the name of Dr. Grace Turner. She's works with the Antiquities and Monuments Corporation in the Bahamas, and she's a wealth of knowledge because many of the enslaved folks that found freedom in the Bahamas, they established these communities. And there's one major community on the island of Andros. It's Red Bays. And so she is well-versed in kind of the history of Red Bays, and she's been a source of wealth of information. But there are other people as well. I was able to connect with many other folks. Some of them are no longer with us, but they were really inspirational in trying to get me to think about things a certain way and to really kind of have a respect for not just the movement, but the stories. I think the stories have been, to me, the most impactful part. The heroism, really the ability to do whatever it takes to find the freedom that you desire. I just think the stories that they are very impactful stories in ways that I'm still unable to articulate. As I read them, sometimes it moves me in ways. It's just like, man, these people, wow, look at what they had to do, to find freedom. So very important work.
My mind started spinning about use of technology and getting young people to record oral histories and to make small films about what you're doing there. Like I can see Bahamian students or kids in South Carolina, Georgia coming upon this. And it's like, again, here's this technology and all the things you could do with it to bring this story alive.
Yeah. Getting back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Being intentional about, here's technology. How can we use it in a way that's meaningful and appropriate, right? That's important because we're not gonna do away with technology, right? So how do we incorporate it and make it meaningful and useful and valuable?
I'm curious. You mentioned you didn't see the connection to environmental education in the beginning.
No.
What were some of the connections?
Well, I think there's quite a bit of indigenous knowledge that the Seminoles possessed, and enslaved Africans as well, and they shared those technologies. And so, trying to explore, for example, how the canoe building. One of the things that we discovered is that they use canoes as a method of travel in their escape, and so there's quite a bit of knowledge around boat building and where'd you source your wood, and then even in the communities that they built, these communities were described as very these were well-established communities. I mean, they planted corn, and they had squash and pumpkins, and so there was agriculture, and just sustainability was kind of a part of the vibe of the community. And so these folks were very intentional about creating communities that could last, And even today, when you go to Red Bays, they've survived hurricanes. They have, there's been lots of tragic events that have happened on the island of Andros over the years. There's been at least 2 major hurricanes that have hit the island, but that community is still there. They're resilient. They're strong. They still have many of the customs that, were passed down. And the fact that they were able to carve out an existence on that remote island at all is just brilliant, and it's a study in itself. I think that those types of communities should be studied, and what are the sustainability, what are the wisdoms that we can gather from the folks that establish those communities, and they're still there, thriving. And of course, things are changing. Technology is influencing the way people move and that kind of thing. But those are things that I really look to as a source of strength and thinking about. So how can we be more sustainable? How can we get kids back to agricultural practices in a way that doesn't seem like, a lot of work, that kind of thing? These are ethics that we need to hold on to for as long as we can.
Do you see just the use of food and things? Do you see a lot of I'm just thinking of recipes and there's an interesting culture around food in the South and agriculture. And it's an interesting way, I think, to maybe connect people and kids back to their roots and their culture. And
absolutely, man.
And so it's interesting how all these little threads tie together in that region.
Yeah, there's a guy, I think he's a chef, I can't remember his name, but he's doing a lot of work with rice and kind of, they used to cultivate rice on the East Coast, in that area, the Gullah Geechee corridor. And so there's work around kind of understanding how that works and incorporating that culture, like you mentioned, having those food items and being able to teach those things to the younger folks and making sure they understand those aspects. That's very important too.
Yeah, I know there's a chef. I think her last name is Bailey, and she's become quite famous. She was in a Netflix series called Chef's Table, and the piece was about the connection to the rice and the rice growing, and all of these children of slaves that are now living in because they were pushed into these very marginal lands, but then they've turned those lands into shrimping and fish and rice and stuff. Yeah, great resilience in that.
Yeah. Those are the wisdoms that we need to hold on to and teach to our kids, being able to find a way to make things happen and to continue to move forward, no matter what the odds are.
Because it was interesting because a lot of these farmers in there, no science background, almost no formal education background, but yet we're growing species of rice that we're beginning to lose, like incredible species of rice in those coastal waters.
Which makes us, really rethink, when we say science, we need to rethink what that means because, before we had journals and peer review and all that, people were out there doing incredible things. And so a part of my work also, and this is something that I'm working towards as I pursue my doctoral work, is, really considering science identity and who gets to be a scientist and who gets to assume that role. And we talked about this earlier with representation, but, it is critical that we are able to expand our understanding of who a scientist is. And if we can do that, then I think we will be able to learn a lot more and open doors that have traditionally been closed to us because we're short-sighted in our understanding and our definitions.
Well, speaking of wanting to do that, this is the World We Want podcast.
That's right.
What is that world you want?
It's a world that values and appreciates every single human being and what they bring to the table. It's a world where we teach, but we don't just teach for teaching's sake. We teach with the understanding that when we teach, we create hope. I have an acronym for TEACH. It's true education always creates hope. And so we have an opportunity to create the world we want by continuing to educate, but to make sure that everybody is involved in the process and making sure that we all have a way to engage with the things that we're passionate about and to inspire young people to continue to be curious about the world, continue to follow their heart in whatever field that they get into, but to always remember to engineer that hope, to bring hope to the world in whatever it is that we do. If we can, and I saw this earlier, there was someone else downstairs that had, I think it was Bora, she was presenting on climate action. She had something about hope. And I thought to myself, right on, like we're not in despair. We're not going to look down and feel, depressed. And we're not going to do that. We're going to keep our heads up and we're going to look for ways to create the future we want with hope.
That's a great acronym, by the way. I never thought of it that way. Did you come up with that?
I did. That's one of the fun things I like to do, just kind of think about words and how to put them together.
No, that's a brilliant acronym. Stefan, thanks so much.
Thank you, man.
I really want to thank Stefan. It's inspiring to meet and talk with somebody that really embodies the very essence of environmental education and educator. Proactive, inspiring, thoughtful, and caring. A special thanks to our entire podcast team, Carrie Albright, Judy Browse, Jimena Cuenca, and Stacy Pierpoint. And a special thanks to you for being a part of the world we want. I'm your host, Gerry Ellis. Join us next time to hear more stories from individuals and communities creating a better future through the power of environmental education. You've been listening to The World We Want, the NAAEE podcast.